Welcome, 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 my Be Health Empowered family, to another episode of Excuse Me, Doctor. My name is Dr. Melissa Clark. Please call me Dr. Mel. I am delighted to be back here with you once again this week to bring you the information that you need to be empowered when it comes to making wise health decisions, not just for yourself, but for your family, your loved ones, and even for your community. So, if this is your first time, if you're just now joining the Be Health Empowered family and being part of Be Health Empowered movement, please remember to hit that like button if you're checking us out on Facebook. And if you're checking us out on YouTube, please hit that red subscribe button. We really appreciate you for it. And if you're already a part of the Be Health Empowered family, you know the drill. You know that in order to do this each and every week, I have to have Miss Lila Mays and Mr. Wayne Bruce right here to help. It's an amazing week for everybody. So, hey, y'all.
Hey, happy
Hey.
Monday.
Happy Monday.
Happy
I hope everybody
Monday.
had a great weekend.
I did. I had a great weekend.
We
I
did.
worked
All
all
right.
weekend, but it was still a great weekend.
Yes, it
Yeah.
was a great weekend. It was beautiful here on the East Coast. So, I can't really complain at all.
Mm.
So
Yeah,
so this is a special episode, right?
indeed.
It
We have
is.
one other co-host to bring into the studio, because every month we work with the Howard University Research Centers and Minority Institutions Community Engagement Corps. I have to take a breath every time I say that. Um, and the whole idea is to bring a focus on all the wonderful minds at Howard University and also all the great research that is being done, and think about ways in which the community can help inform that and also be educated by it. So, to do that, our co host from Howard University is Miss Karen Parker, who is project coordinator, community engagement, um, research centers and minority institutions program at the Howard University College of Medicine. Yes, I have to take another breath.
Good
Welcome, Karen.
evening. I take a deep breath too, let me tell you. It's good to see everybody again. Hello, happy
Hi,
Monday,
Karen.
happy
Hey, Karen, how
autumn.
you doing?
All is well. I was
Good.
out
We
leaf
good.
peeping this weekend. It was fabulous.
Wow.
Oh
Maybe
yeah,
we have
it
one
was
more week of
beautiful.
that.
Yeah, it was gorgeous,
Yep.
especially as you went further up the East Coast. It was breathtathing.
Leaf
It's the
peeping
Nice.
beauty
and
of fall.
rooftop house music. I mean, what? There's nothing
Ooh,
better. There's nothing better.
I love it. I agree. Love
Yes.
So
that.
yeah, we have an incredible show tonight, right, Lala?
We do. Tonight, we're going to be talking about domestic violence part two because after part one, we had so many additional questions when we talked to Francesca Dalla Betta, the training and outreach coordinator at the DC Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And she helped set the table for us to understand the difference between domestic violence and intimate partner violence. And she gave us some basics to understand how to spot DV. I'm going to say DV instead of domestic violence, just to shorten it up. So I'm when I say DV or someone else on our show tonight says DV, we're meaning domestic violence. But she gave us the basics around how to spot it and how to be supportive of individuals going through it.
That's
I
right.
appreciate that. Um, I have to say that I actually rewatched that episode just to make sure that I got everything. It was just so rich. And there were a
Yeah.
couple of things that stood out for me. One, it was actually, yeah, two things. One was the spiral of violence that she talked about. It was like an
Mhm.
explanation of the quiet sort of tension building part of the cycle, and then
Mhm.
the unfortunate violent action, and then the sweet apology, and just this repetition of that cycle.
Mhm.
And the other thing that stood out for me really was when we asked about what we could do if we witnessed something like this happening some around us, and we were very gently reminded that it's not a good idea to report witnessed DV without first asking for consent from the survivor. So, and the reason for that is that if it may be putting them further in harm's way. So I thought those were two of my major takeaways that I learned.
Exactly. Yeah, those were big ones, Karen. That second one was a big one for me. I actually think I asked that question. It was really eye-opening to know that physical abuse is not the only type of domestic violence, right? There's psychological, mental, caregiver, verbal abuse, and there's so many others.
So we're going to take that extra step today. We're going to build on what we learned from Francesca, and how and hit on how DV manifests, like in Black and brown people, in Black and brown communities. We're going to touch on the role of the Black church. That seems to be in most topics today, the Black church, and who's even more at risk, who is the most at risk, and it may shock you who's the most at risk.
Right. So yeah, we're going to cover that, all those things and so much more, because we have an incredible guest tonight who's going to help us dive into this topic. And I just want to remind the Be Health Empowered family to get those questions ready, get your comments in the chat as we go through it and things occur to you, because we're going to be coming to you just in a few, once we get the conversation going with our incredible guest, who is Dr. Kesslyn Brade Stennis. She is the program director of the Master's in Social Work program at the University of the District of Columbia. And she's also executive director of the North American Association of Christians in Social Work. Welcome, Dr. Brade Stennis. And it's okay to call you Dr. Kesslyn, right?
Please call me Dr. Kesslyn, please.
All right, wonderful. Well, we love to start off with kind of learning a little bit more about you. So what are the areas of research that you work on in social work, and how does it pertain to domestic violence?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really have focused much of my work on the empowerment of women, actually. And under that deals with women's leadership and domestic violence, intimate partner violence. I've also done quite a bit of research on issues that impact the Black community, specifically issues related to crime and violence, and even issues related to gentrification and the impact of gentrification on faith communities. So those are like intersectionality pieces for me. Black women, faith communities, violence, and well-being. Yeah. So that's been my area of focus for quite some time.
I love the empowerment, because like I said, we're all about that here.
Yes. Thank you.
Dr. Brade Stennis, welcome again. Can I just double check? You are a bison, correct?
Absolutely, I'm a bison. I'm a quite over bison.
And for those who don't know, Howard University are bisons. So
we're bisons. 100%. I got my PhD in 2009 from Howard, and in 2006 I got my MDiv from Howard. So yes, I am a bison.
Masters of Divinity. All right, look at you.
She is a bison times two, and we try to uplift our bison every time we are on. So welcome again. I wanted to just jump right in and find out what inspired you to do the type of research that you do, and also to formulate the START model for culturally competent domestic violence education and prevention. That's another mouthful.
It is a mouthful. It is a mouthful. My work in domestic violence really started, in the early to mid 1990s, when I was on faculty at Oakwood, then college. We had written a grant for a training grant to support our students in understanding domestic violence and training them to be empowerers, to empower the community. And so we received this grant, and we were working to develop, at the beginning stages, working to develop an effective research agenda that included training our students when almost the unthinkable happened. At least for me back then, it was unthinkable. In my faith community, there were 2 sisters who were killed in one domestic violence incident.
Oh my God.
And to say that it was devastating to my faith community is an understatement. The sisters, one sister had been in a domestic violence relationship, but the those who were closest to her didn't recognize it as such, right? It
Mhm.
doesn't, you don't come home from your first date with bruises and bumps. It doesn't happen that way. And so the family didn't particularly like the gentleman, but they couldn't put their finger on why, and they just didn't connect her experience to domestic violence. And when some of those connections were beginning to be made, the sister, first sister, was confronted her perpetrator,
Oh my.
and the mother just sensed that something was odd. So she sent the other sister to check on her sister. And in one incident, both sisters were killed.
Wow.
It was a double
Wow.
funeral. It was just very, very difficult. All of this is happening now at the same time. We got this grant, and this situation happens. A few
Mhm.
months after both sisters were killed, leaving a newborn behind, in essence. One sister had a newborn. Um, we had a chance to have a conversation with those parents. And I know we're going to talk about it again tonight, but we read through a list of red flags or warning signs. And in hindsight, the parents were able to see so many of the warning signs, but they didn't know beforehand
Right.
that
Because you have to
these,
have the context to understand. Yeah.
yes. And so, I just decided then that it was important for other faith communities to be aware, to have a knowledge, to have the language around intimate partner violence, domestic violence. And those are 2 different concepts, but we'll use them interchangeably tonight. And so
Mhm.
I decided when I became a bison that this was the area that I wanted to study. I wanted to help other people in faith communities and those leaders have a voice surrounding this topic. And so that
Okay.
was, both of those kind of issues came about at the same time. And that's where my research in this area began.
Okay. So from what I'm hearing, then START is particularly geared toward people who are in the faith community.
Not necessarily. So
Okay.
Okay.
the START model evolved from the research, that's funded research that we had. There were a team, it was 4 or 5 of us, and we looked at the findings that we had over this training the 5 local Alabama communities on this issue. And
Mhm.
we said there's got to be a simple, easy way to empower people to do the work. And
Mhm.
so we literally sat down on the floor in my home and came up with a START model, which evolved from all of the training. So let me just explain a bit about what the START model is. It can be used in
Yes.
faith communities, but
Okay.
doesn't,
Mhm.
but also can be used in other areas. So START is an acronym for shatter the silence. There's so much silence around issues of
Yes.
so much
Right.
silence. And so the S is shatter the silence regarding your own experience and your own reality surrounding issues of abuse. And then there's the T. So once you've done your own work, and that also includes doing work with a therapist, right?
Okay.
Doing work
Mhm.
with your physician so that you can understand the impact. We'll talk about health, but shatter the silence surrounding the realities. And then T is talk about it. In our model, it is in parentheses because it is still taboo, particularly in communities of color. We
Mhm.
don't talk about it So once you've done your own work, you begin to talk about it. And there are several exercises and processes that we use to encourage people to talk about it.
Yeah, and I want to make sure we get back and talk about why that might be in communities of color. But keep going, because we got to get to that A.
Got to get to
Right.
the A. So
Right.
the A is you're beginning. It's a scaffolding approach. The A is alert. So you're alerting the public, and there are lots of ways to do this. We talk about how to do it in faith communities. It could be having posters in your bathrooms, because sometimes restrooms are the only safe places, right? It could be having announcements made from the pulpit. It could be having a special service in October surrounding domestic violence, DV. There are lots of different ways to alert. You're creating a safe space for people to begin their own process. Shatter the silence, talk about it, alert the public. And then R is refer. The reality is, like your guest said last week, every opportunity to intervene may not be the best opportunity to intervene. And so it is important to refer to resources and specialists in this area. We don't want to put a victim or a perpetrator in harm's way. And I'll talk about perpetrators in harm's way specifically in our community. So refer to a person who has, or a resource that has the expertise, and then train. T is train. Continue to train yourselves and others. We don't know it all. We don't know it all. There's always evolving surrounding this topic. So shatter the silence, talk about it, alert the public, refer, and continue to get training. That's
Wow.
that evolves.
That is a wonderful model. Thank you for breaking that down for us.
Absolutely.
And I want to go back to that, the silence, right? Since that's kind of where it all starts, and the
Yes.
need to shatter the silence. What have you seen when you through your research or interaction with others around how we think about domestic violence, sort of the public's mindset on domestic violence? Where does the stigma come from, and what can be done to sort of change that mindset and shatter the silence?
Oh boy, such an important question, because there is so much silence around it. And I think it depends on the community that we are really addressing for us to understand where the silence comes from. In our community, we have been taught intergenerationally to be quiet about our own pain. We don't go to doctors. We don't talk about things in our family. In fact, what is said is what happens in the home stays in the home.
Yes.
Don't air your dirty laundry.
Don't air your dirty laundry. So these practices for many years kept us alive. As when I say for us, I mean Black folk, African Americans, kept us alive. So keep your head down and just keep moving forward. Right? Silence. The other factor that is really important for us as we talk about domestic violence is religiosity and spirituality. Take it to God in prayer.
Right.
Or take it to your clergy person who will take it to God in prayer. But other than that, don't air your dirty laundry. God sees, God hears, and God knows. And God does see in my faith tradition. God sees, hears, and knows. But God also provides you resources, people who are trained to help you and support you through. So you don't have to be silent anymore. There are other factors that impact our level of silence. For us, there's one researcher talked about mourning, and mourning, MORNING, MOURNING, and when the moaning, like mourning.
Yes.
We go through all of those processes. We have faith about a better day. And so if we just keep silent, we believe that a better day will coming. It's about faith. But in reality, we moan every day. The losses, our body keeps score of the pain that we've
right.
And so we do moan. and we mourn, we cry for the losses of our innocence, of our children, and of our men. One of
Mhm.
the reasons we keep silent in our community, I feel like I'm on a soapbox now, but one
Yeah.
of the reasons we keep silent is because we have a distrust of the system that is in
Right.
to protect us. And so if we call the police, then that means what for in heterosexual relationships? That means what for the Black man who's supposed to love me as a Black woman?
Right.
That
Or
means
and
people.
even
Or
gay
the
relationships
I was
because
just about to
two
say thank
two
you.
gay men,
Absolutely,
if one calls the police on the other, the same potential consequences.
absolutely,
Absolutely.
absolutely. And so we feel a need to protect, even as we don't have the protection. There is a
Mhm.
need to protect from a larger system of oppression and historic trauma and slavery. So, all of these elements really lead to us being silent in our own pain.
Right. And
Silent.
one partner choosing basically to sacrifice themselves
Yes,
for what they perceive to be protecting the other partner or the family unit.
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
Yep.
And it's challenging. So as a researcher and a person who works in this area, how do you address this silence? And so we use the START model and the training and some other tools to help people understand you're not alone. You're not the only person who has experienced this type of abuse, and this type of violence, this type of unhealthy relationship. We are here to support you. It's
Mhm.
important that we have more people of color in communities of color with this information, because we know that there are some, and we talked about it just a moment ago, there's some distrust of the system.
Right.
Yes.
And then we're gonna get to that. I know Karen has something that she's wants to get in and ask you about that.
Sorry,
Well,
I'm on a roll. I'm on a roll.
I am interested to know outside because we don't want to just center our thoughts and our questions about uh, the church because there are other institutions, right, that
Yeah.
we hold sacred in our community that have sort of a hierarchy. So I wanted to know if there are other spaces like institutional spaces, social spaces, educational spaces. Do you have to sell the leadership on the importance of this training, or are you welcomed in? I'm curious to know about that.
Um, in some spaces, you have to sell,
Mm,
and in some spaces, you're welcomed in. People who have,
wow.
yeah, people who have experienced it have very interesting responses. Some of them don't want to uncover their own trauma, and so it's pushed away, right?
Mm.
And others who are much more introspective and welcoming, who recognize that this is an issue, they welcome you in to prevent this type of trauma to happen to other people. So it really, really depends. It really
Right.
depends.
Yeah.
My goodness.
So you had mentioned earlier about the red flags. I'm definitely not, gonna make I want to make sure we get back to that, right?
Yes.
So in the early stages of a relationship or a living situation, are there some behavioral red flags that could point to an unsafe situation? Like you mentioned, the parents of the sisters who just they couldn't put their finger on it, but they knew something was off. Could you break that down for us?
So in the beginning, thank you for that question. In the beginning of relationships, people don't see the physical abuse. If it's physical, let me
Mhm.
just caveat: uh, domestic abuse, intimate partner violence is so much more than physical abuse.
Yes.
It's so much more than physical. It doesn't start that way. It
Mhm.
starts with the manipulation and leads to the gaslighting, and then ends at some point in many cases in physical abuse, but it doesn't start there. What does it look like at the very beginning? It looks like, I just want to spend all of my time with you.
Right.
I just want to buy you anything that you need or that you want. It's grooming a person into a level of trust. And then it moves into a level of jealousy. I don't like you being around that person. And then it moves into a level of isolation. I forbid you to be around that person. And
Mhm.
because you are now in love with your partner, you want to honor him or her in their request. Other red flags: extreme jealousy. Um, there's a whole list of red flags, but um, uh, wanting a quick relationship and a quick marriage before you
Mhm.
see the mask come down, right?
Mhm.
Um, a person who has a history of abuse or violence, and it can be a family history or their personal history. We tend to want to change folk.
Yeah.
The history is the history. Okay.
Believe them when you see it the first time, right?
Absolutely. A person who has difficulty maintaining a job. There's a reason they've been
Interesting.
let go.
Interesting.
A
Mhm.
person who has very rigid beliefs about gender roles. Women should do this, men should do this. Here are the expectations. Those are all red flags. A person who has financial challenges consistently. A person who has connections or challenges with substance use disorder. Some of these pieces go hand in hand. So it doesn't always start with a kick, a push, a punch. It doesn't, not always. It doesn't start with a kick,
Mhm.
a push, or punch. But there's a process to minimizing your personhood and building a loving, trusting, seemingly relationship with another person. And eventually it leads to the minimization of you and the authoritative uh, perspective of the other person who simply wants power and control.
Mhm.
I was just
And
thinking that control, it
yeah.
sounds like control is all through there. That, and it sounds like a history of trauma, maybe.
A history of trauma. Absolutely. So
Right.
many people are socialized to believe that certain behaviors in relationship are normal, expected, and if they're not there, they create that norm. Right? It's what
Mhm.
they know. It's what they know.
Right. And so you bring up an interesting point, um, in terms of the history. What stage in life do people start to experience domestic violence in their lives? I mean, it's may or may I was sort of surprised when I sat down and thought about this and read about it. It's not necessarily in adulthood, right?
No. So we just talked about being socialized. You are
Mm.
socialized to family norms from birth. You can experience domestic violence. Domestic violence does not have to be just with intimate partners. It is within a home or within a relationship, relational situation. So even as a child, you can experience domestic violence. Child abuse within a home is a form of
Mhm.
domestic violence. People are exposed to it from early on, but the data suggests that most people, the most common time frame in which people experience physical violence is
Mhm.
18 to 24.
So as a young adult.
Very
As
young.
an adult. But that
Hmm.
does not negate the fact that you've been exposed to it for a
Mhm.
very long time. You've experienced dating violence. It may look like, or dating
Mhm.
abuse, it may look like emotional manipulation, financial manipulation. It could look like um, psychological games, gaslighting, minimizing your thoughts, your experiences. That happens earlier in life. So
Yeah.
by the time you're 18 to 24, it's
Yeah.
all acceptable.
And can you define gaslighting for us? Because, you know, I've been in conversations where people didn't know what it meant. So please break it down for us.
Thank you for that question. Important. So gaslighting is the process. It's a process of minimizing your own thoughts, beliefs, behaviors, expectations. The process of minimizing it and leading to the place where you think you're crazy and you wonder if you even have a sense of identity. A person is slowly but surely engaging in a process to minimize your sense of self. It doesn't start with saying you're crazy. It starts
Right.
with asking you questions that lead you to question yourself.
But are
Mhm.
you sure you're
Are
going to
you
believe
sure?
me or your lying eyes?
Yes.
That
Yes.
is really insidious.
No,
Yeah.
you have blue and black marks. I didn't do that. Really?
Right.
Really?
Right.
And I
Right.
mean, it gets to a place where you're really questioning what truth is.
Mhm. Wow.
Hmm. So I'm actually circling back to that red flags question. That sounds like a huge red flag, but then again, if you're in a situation where you are in a shared space, shared living space, and it's essential to have trust, how do you pick that apart so that it doesn't look like you're not being trusting? You want to be able to trust the person that you're sharing space with. I feel like that's the challenge.
We have been, many women have been taught to not listen to ourselves, our thoughts, our beliefs. We're taught. I just read something the other day about how women are taught not to trust themselves.
Mhm.
We are socialized to not
Yeah.
trust ourselves. So I want to counter that thinking. And I want to tell all of the women in this community, to thine own self be true. If it feels
Mhm.
odd, if what you're seeing doesn't line up with what you're thinking and expecting, if a person tells you one thing and consistently what you're seeing and sensing and believing is something else, believe that.
Right.
Trust yourself.
Intuition.
Intuition.
Yep. Trust. Go with your gut.
Go with your gut. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yep.
So, Dr. Mel, I have a little bit of a pivot, but if you've got another question, please go ahead because I want to let that thought settle about intuition.
Yeah. No. Well, I did want to make sure that we got back to talking. We've sort of talked a little bit about Black and Brown communities, and you know some of the differences, right, in Black and Brown communities, and how domestic violence might show up in ways that it might not show up in other communities. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to start by saying, I'm going to start by saying that most homes are safe spaces.
Mhm.
And I start there, pardon me. I start there because it's easy for us to pathologize Black and Brown families. And I don't want to do that. So
Right.
most Black and Brown families are violence and abuse free. So
Mhm.
that's the foundation upon which we're going to build this house. However, the reported instances of abuse tend to be higher in Black and Brown communities. Now, that does not mean that it happens more often. It means that it is reported more often. Now, let's think about that within the socioeconomic context. People who have more to lose by reporting don't report.
Right.
Makes sense.
Doesn't mean that it doesn't happen.
Mhm.
Just means that they don't report.
Right.
Understood.
So standing in the community, financial gain, their
Yes.
businesses. Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. Yes. So those folk don't tend to report as readily. And if they report to spaces that are deemed safe for them
Mhm.
to maintain their
Mm.
status, their position. In our community, when we do report, we are, gosh, how do we say that we risk more? We risk more. I talked about the moaning, and mourning,
Mhm.
Mhm.
but we also risk livelihood,
Of course.
well-being. Black women are at a higher rate of incarceration when they report.
Wow.
We report,
Even if they are the victims.
yes, we
Right.
are re-victimized and re-traumatized when we report. We are more likely to go to prison. Black men, jail, prison, incarceration. Black men are also more likely to be incarcerated as it relates to domestic violence.
Mhm.
So when we report, the consequences of our reporting are traumatic, acute, and sometimes lethal. We also have higher lethality as it relates to domestic violence. We don't leave those situations alive in many cases. Um, we're killed. I mean, the
Mhm.
instances are more acute. So for me as a researcher and someone who works in this area, it means I have to be very careful when I say tell somebody. You you should tell somebody, but I have to also recognize what that means for this woman or this man who is being impacted.
Mhm. And the need to have a safety plan.
And the
Right.
absolutely,
Right.
absolutely, the
Mhm.
need to have a safety plan. Um, have a little money, have your cards, have your medicine, make sure that you are ready to go when you decide to go.
Mhm.
And have your
Yeah.
support circle, of course, and don't tell the person who's likely to break code, right?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. You also, I won't even tell that story. There, oh gosh, just be
I mean,
wise.
we're here to listen to the stories. I mean, that's what this is about. I
I was
mean,
I was in South Africa with with a study group, and there was a lady who came to me in essence. She didn't know me and my research, and I didn't know her. And she told me the story of leaving an abusive relationship with her 3 children, and she went to a clergy person, and the clergy person said, "I can't help you because you're living in sin." She wasn't
Wow.
married to her abuser. He was
Mhm.
the father of her children, but she wasn't married. And the clergy person said, "I can't help you because you're living in sin."
Wow.
This was South Africa in a wonderful restaurant, and we are both crying. Again, she didn't know my research, I didn't know her. And it was just validation of the call and the necessity to do this work and to create more safe spaces.
Mhm. That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yes, who
How
do
your work
things
creates more safe spaces so that people don't get that response.
absolutely, absolutely. It's a call for us to do more specifically for people in our community. It's a call.
I just looked at the clock, and if it's okay, just before we go to the audience to get their feedback, because I'm sure there's a lot of conversation. I'm so glad that you came back to the genderlessness of this, the fact that women and men can suffer just as severely in
Yes,
this. There are no, so to speak, winners and losers here.
absolutely.
Um, I
And
saw
those
a
who
really,
are
I'm sorry, go
abused
ahead.
have been abused. Those
Can you?
who abuse tend to
Mhm.
have been abused.
Abuse,
So you're right.
right.
There are no
It's a
winners.
cycle. It's
There
a
are no
cycle.
winners.
I saw just like with Dr. Melissa, we both did a deep dive on this, and I saw a stat that made me sort of double back and look at it again. It says unidirectional female to male partner violence. And so that is violence inflicted upon males from females in a study was significantly higher, or reported to be significantly higher than male to female partner violence. This was a study done amongst Black couples. And so the takeaway here is that regardless of gender, Black couples most often inflicted and sustained minor or moderate aggression, and there were no gender differences in the rates of physiological and psychological and physical victimization. Also, they did a study amongst Black undergraduate students. I know that we were talking about the earliest ages where this type of violence is being seen. And again, there was a report that women tended to inflict more dating violence than men. So I wanted to know if you saw that across the board, given that you were doing research in various aspects in our community. Is this something that you found in your research?
I haven't found it, but it doesn't mean that it's not true. And here's my thought about that. What it could mean is that we are doing a better job of providing spaces for men to actually say, yes, this happened to me.
Mm-hmm. In the context of that research.
In the context of that research, yes.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So men perhaps now are beginning to feel less shame surrounding sharing that this had happened to them. And I think that's positive. Early on in my own work, I felt the need to do some of that work with men who, in my study, felt shame about saying, yes, this has happened to me. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it could mean that we are beginning to dismantle some of those gender expectations regarding or gender beliefs regarding abuse. I don't know. I do know that in some countries, the stats regarding male to female abuse and female to male abuse are very even.
Right.
And there are men who do talk about their abusive experiences as a victim.
Right. Yeah. No, and I'm glad that we brought that out because I think it helps to let folks know from a balanced perspective this can go either way. I think though, the perception is that when it happens, men with physical violence against women, specifically physical violence, that it can be much more lethal just because of the difference in strength.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that we bring back in Wayne and Lila to see, what kind of questions or comments are going on in the chat. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Hey.
Hi.
Ahead,
So
Lila.
what you got out there?
Yvonne asked a really interesting, Yvonne, one of our regular Be Health Empowered family members, asks, how do you handle, Yvonne, I'll paraphrase this, but how do you handle an abuser showing up at the job?
Great question.
That is not an unusual occurrence, unfortunately. Remember that this is about power and control. Right. And a part of showing up at the job means I'm putting you at risk of losing your job, losing your livelihood, so that I can control you. Right? Mm-hmm. So how do you handle it? It is really challenging for people sometimes to go to their human resources office. But in this case, it may be your best protection against someone showing up at your job. So you can put them on notice. And then human resources then provides a bit of a buffer and a safety for you. That would be something I would encourage folk to consider.
As a follow-on to that, is there any sort of negative experience in your awareness? You know, people might be concerned about doing that very thing, again, because of our history of going to human resources and finding out that human resources is really there for
the company, not for you.
Right.
Yeah. There are some laws in place to protect you.
Okay.
I believe it's Title 9 is there to protect you. The I've forgotten the Clery Act is there to protect you. So there are certain legal pieces that are there to protect you. And you know, if you feel comfortable, you can always call 911. You can always call 911. And I know that there are some challenges with that, but if you feel that you are not in a safe space, that may be a viable option for you.
For the abuser, I mean, for the abused, or for coworkers. I'm gonna put my HR hat on for a second, because if I'm in a hostile environment, this has now been created an environment of hostility, is that an opportunity for someone who, as a witness to this, for them to call 911?
Great question.
Yeah.
It can be a catch-22.
Okay.
Right? But, and this is personal for me, I would err on the side of what's going to protect a person in this situation.
Okay.
And it may require police intervention for that person's safety. So, you know, that may not be the common thought, but that's what I would do.
Okay. Great question, Yvonne. So, Dr. Kesslyn, in your opinion, is there a path for mutual justice for victims of domestic violence within their relationship, or must there be a separation to achieve that?
So most domestic violence relationships, again, are about power and control.
Mm-hmm.
There is the opportunity for mutuality, mutual justice, but you can't start there. I would not start with that as the goal. I would start with the person.
What does that mean, though? What do you mean?
So in reality, you are wanting the victim to be safe. And because this is a power and control scenario, they can't be safe in the same presence as the person who has traumatized them. So you have to focus on their safety and well-being separately first, and help for the person who is the abuser. And that person's going to require some therapy. Both actually will require some therapy, independent of one another, and a sense of awareness, introspection. How did I get here? What are my triggers? For both. Have to do your individual work, and perhaps in the end there's some coming together. But I wouldn't start there. I just wouldn't start there.
So
not in a situation when there's one person who has more power and control over another.
So I have a few questions.
Sure.
One of them, is there any research linking having gone through DV and anything linking it to having long-term health effects, psychological or physical, of the DV victim?
Yes, yes, and yes. So yes, yes, and more yes. Um, the most recent research that I read came out of a government study from 2022,
Mm.
and findings were, gosh, this is so emotional for me. But the findings are that people who have experienced domestic violence have higher mental health challenges, physical health challenges, challenges with substance abuse and other addictions, challenges with, I said mental health, depression, anxiety, increased rates of cancer. There is
Mhm.
definitely a connection between sustained trauma and health. And the longer the traumatic experience continues, the higher the impact on one's health in all areas of life, including socioeconomic status. The,
Wow.
Mm.
the impact is, in some situations, I was reading, it's 13% higher. You're at 13%
Mm.
higher risk for certain health issues.
Wow.
Um, so it is the impact is real. The impact is real.
Yeah. And it's not surprising because, of that mind-body connection, right? If you're going through a traumatic experience, you experience it in your body because your cortisol levels are high, your immune system gets suppressed, and
Yep,
so the higher rates of cancer and other physical things happen. And of course, the same with your mental health as well.
right,
Yeah.
right. The weight gain,
Mhm.
all of the indicators uh, increase as a result of experiencing domestic violence and trauma.
So
Wow.
so I wanna just take a personal moment here to say that I was dealing with a friend of mine who was a victim of domestic violence. He was a victim, and I was the only one he could confide in. And so
Mm,
it
Mhm.
was really different. It was really weird, and he was really ashamed that he was
mhm,
allowing this to
Mhm.
happen to him.
mhm.
And
Mm.
so it wasn't until he was able to get out of the household. But what happened was his wife, they were going through a divorce then, and they might have been divorced by this time, start abusing his son. And so
Mm.
it's two things I want to ask, because we have a question from uh, the West Coast. Rhoda Lawrence says, what do studies show specifically regarding the impact of violent, abusive mothers on their sons? And are mothers more influential than the fathers? And I asked the question, and this completely is out of blue from Rhoda. I see this question here. It is because it started me thinking about what's happening to that young man, to the son, right? The mother wasn't really held to the fire until she abused the child,
Mm,
right? And
Mhm.
she was never held to the fire for abusing the husband, right?
Right.
So, do you have
yeah,
any studies that show any the impact of mothers having being influential in that way?
that is such a powerful question. I don't have the answer for that specifically. But we do know, as we say, the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world, right? The mother's role in a child's life in socializing the child is significant. And I would suspect that mom has also been abused because it's cyclical and it's
Mhm.
generational. And unless that son gets some help, he will either likely be an abuser or a victim. And
Wow. So the key
mhm,
that I think that's key in terms of getting that help.
critically important. Critically important. Get the help, which is why for the START model, we start with the S. You have to shatter the silence in your own your
Mhm.
own mind, your own experience. You have to do your work first. If you need help, get help. Get help.
Well, on that note, are there any resources that you can recommend for survivors?
Yes. So I'm gonna leave the domestic violence helpline, because they are the storehouse, the warehouse for all resources, and they can direct you to where you should go. So their number is 1-800-799-7233. 1-800-799-7233. There are also agencies and organizations in your community. I live in an area of Maryland, and we have a domestic violence hotline here. If you call 911, they can send you to where you need to be if you're in a crisis situation. There's the Women's Leadership Resource Center. There's the Coburn Place. There are lots of um, resources for you, but start with the domestic violence hotline, 1-800-799-7233.
And we'll put that in the chat.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Absolutely. I think, do we have time for one more question?
7233 is safe, isn't it?
Safe, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Unfortunately, we do not.
Wow. Well, this has been incredible. Thank you so much, Dr. Kesslyn. And I want to give you one moment to just tell people where they can reach you on social media. And you also have a podcast as well, right?
I do have a podcast. Yes. Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful being here. Thank you. So in my other life, I help people do research because I understand the impact that research has on practice. My research area is domestic violence, and so I get to do this. But I want to be able to help other people do research. So I'm a doctoral coach, and I can be found on social media, some of the work that I do, just through my name, Dr. Kesslyn. LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, wherever else there is, YouTube. I am Dr. Kesslyn in all places. And I share information about how to help people get in, through, and out of their doctoral programs so they too can use their research to make a dynamic difference in the world.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank
you.
you, Karen, for helping put this together. And thank you, of course, to Lila and Wayne for bringing the questions from the wonderful Be Health Empowered family. And until we see you next time, remember, everyone, to be wise, to be well, and to be health empowered. Thank you so much for joining.